Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to Cut the Shit,
a podcast that takes a closer look at the IT industry, both the good and the bad.
My name is Cameron Plato.
And I'm Bryan Law.
And I'm Bryan Link.
Greetings and welcome to Cut the Shit, a podcast series that aims to take a closer look at the IT industry, both the good and the bad, and hopefully help all of us get better at making the business of technology work for our companies, our customers, and our economies. Cut the Shit is brought to you by Plow Networks, a managed IT services company based just outside Nashville, Tennessee. My name is Bryan Link. I'm the EVP of Products and Services here at Plow, and I'll be your host for this series. I'll ask questions and, with the help of our guests, try to dig deep on some of the key challenges we all face doing IT. So with that, let's cut the shit and get started. On today's episode, we're going to tackle a thorny topic, and that's technology risk and how to manage it. I say thorny because it's just so wide-ranging. Business risk runs the gamut, really, and even if you narrow it down to technology risk, it's never been more expansive than in today's highly connected, widely distributed work environment. In true cut-the-shit fashion, we will not be talking about the latest and greatest software that promises to solve all of your IT risk and security issues. Because let's face it, that doesn't exist. Instead, we're going to zoom in on the financial institution space to see what we can learn from how banks are leveraging technology to better manage risk in general and technology risk specifically. To help us with this discussion, I am pleased to have Bill Simpson, CTO of Ncontracts, with me today. Ncontracts is a rising fintech star and a leader in providing risk and compliance management software for financial institutions. Sexy, I know, right? Ncontracts is growing like crazy, and Bill's development team has been a key part of that growth story. Bill and I have a frank conversation about what risk management is and isn't. We'll get into what it means to be compliant, how networks, the internet, and people complicate the process, and whether regulation is helping or hurting the effort. Through it all, we'll talk about the relationship between software and the broader technology function to see what changes he'd like to see to make the two work better together. Bill is one of the best technologists I know in the fintech space, so I feel sure you will enjoy this conversation. Bill, thanks so much for joining me today on Cut the Shit.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bryan.
I'm really glad to have you. We've known each other a good while now. We go back a ways before we kind of walk down memory lane or anything like that. Why don't you tell us a little bit about where are you today? Where do you sit? Are you in the office, somewhere remote? What's going on today?
Well, I am actually sitting in my basement, so my background's blurred. You can probably see it a little bit back there for those of you who are watching the video. This is an unfinished basement, so it gets lots of commentary from folks because they think it's some industrial place. And sometimes people think it's a background that I've added, but it is actually just my laziness that has me sitting in my unfinished basement. And that's in Franklin, Tennessee. So our offices are open. We do have people going in, but honestly, I've remoted most of my team at this point, so for me to be in the office every day is really unnecessary.
So that does kind of lead into the question. I was going to say, a remote or in office, do you go into the office at all, or is it sort of as needed?
So I try to go into the office 2 to 3 days a week, but I'm not going in on a regular schedule. So I'll go in at 10 o'clock in the morning and leave around 3 o'clock. I'm still working the other hours as well, but it's been a great adjustment because you avoid that commute, but you still get to FaceTime with people that you want to be able to go see.
Yeah, for our listeners who are not from Nashville, Tennessee, it's not Atlanta yet, but it's working on it. So the traffic from where Bill lives to his office is particularly interesting about 8 to 8:30 in the morning. It can be a little bit crazy. It's not LA, Don't get me wrong, but it's also not small town USA either. So.
Yeah, it used to be. We complain a little bit about it here, but I think that's because people don't really understand what real traffic is like. Having lived in Boston and Seattle and San Diego, I can tell you I understand what real traffic is like. Here is a picnic, honestly.
Yeah, it's still a rush hour. It's not all the time. My son lives in
right.
Washington, D.C., and about the only time there's not traffic is like 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. Yep. You can make it work then. That's about it.
And then they still got the garbage trucks out at that time, so you mess up either way.
That's true. So you mentioned your team. Do you have a distributed team? Well, tell us a little bit about your team and where are they?
Sure. So I guess about a little bit of background. So I'm the Chief Technology and Product Officer at a company called Ncontracts that builds out risk management software. So this topic we're discussing today is pretty germane to what we do as an organization.
That's not an accident.
That's good to hear. So, we've got product and technology people essentially, as well as some folks that build content. They're distributed throughout the country. So we made a conscious decision about 2 years ago to already start embracing remote folks. So while I do have a core of people that are in Brentwood, Tennessee, which is about 40 of the folks that report into my organization, the other half or so is distributed throughout the country. Some of them in local offices where they'll have 2 or 3 people there. So we've got a spot in Johnson City, Tennessee. We've got a spot in Charlotte, North Carolina. We've got a spot in LA, actually. But then the rest of them are actually working from home. So we've embraced that a while back.
So tech people, particularly developers, have a reputation for being maybe a little introverted. Maybe on the social side, being a little less on the extroversion equation for sure. Has work from home or this kind of pure remote model, do you feel like it's been good for them in terms of their morale?
I do. I think we do have a series of folks that are introverted. I like to think of them as probably more introverted extroverts. Once they get to know people, they become more extroverted. And I think that's pretty universal across the scene from a technology perspective. So it's been good to be able to onboard people remotely. But I will tell you, I do think there's some fractures there. I think people miss getting together, honestly. So we're trying to do a little bit of the best of both worlds there. Even in the future, as the pandemic opens back up, we're going to allow people to work remotely continuously, but we're going to create office space that makes it compelling for them to want to come in, not necessarily to hang out, but a destination space that gets them coming in a few times a week or maybe a few times a month.
Got it. So for you specifically, what's your work from home setup other than being down in the dungeon? What's your setup like? How do you arrange your setup? Do you go dual monitor, stand up? What's your flavor?
Great question. So I have a stand-up desk with dual monitors on it. When I moved down into the basement, part of the reason I wanted to move down here was because my gym is also down here. So I have exercise equipment down here, which is nice to be able to stand up and go do something other than just sit at the desk all day. When we went home, I actually told everybody, take your stuff. So I didn't want people going home and working from their kitchen counters. I wanted people to go home with real desks. So everybody that's on my team took home their standing desks and all of the equipment that they had with them. So they're all pretty similarly set up. So yeah, dual monitors. Actually, I have dual computers down here. One that I can use as a writing pad, so it's easier to do whiteboarding with folks, things like that. And then my other computer for just general work.
Gotcha. All right. So before we get to serious stuff, one kind of funny question. You've been doing this remote thing for a bit, which means you've been on a lot of Zoom calls or Teams calls or WebExes. What's the funniest thing that's happened to you on a Zoom call that you can remember?
Funniest things. I mean, I've seen lots of dogs jump up on people's laps and knock over coffee cups onto people. So I've seen that probably 2 or 3 times. I think that's a good one. I have not seen anybody stand up without pants on yet.
That's good. That's a good thing.
Thankfully. Yeah, I'm not sure that happens as much as we'd like to think it does.
That's a bit of an urban legend, I believe.
I do too. I do think there are people who forget they're on video. So you'll see people, picking their nose and other things like that occasionally, which is kind of funny.
So if I do that on this, please let me know so we can edit that out before we drop this on YouTube. I'd appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yeah, but nothing crazy, honestly. It's I guess it's a blessing in a lot of ways.
Yeah, the funniest thing that ever happened to me, we were on an all-hands WebEx, so there was probably about 200 people on this, and it was like a big presentation, somebody talking, everybody listening, and no one, you didn't get to choose to be put on, you got put on mute. You didn't put yourself on mute, but they opened it up to a Q&A session, and they told everybody, we're going to unmute everyone. Please mute yourself unless you have a question. So as soon as they unmuted everybody, of course, there was a lot of noise because people had not done it because they were half paying attention. But one person in particular was having an issue with their child, and they were literally wearing this kid out verbally when they unmuted the mic. I mean, F-bombs, everything. It was... No one really knew who it was, and of course no one claimed credit for it, and it was muffled enough you couldn't really tell who the voice was, so there was a lot of fun sort of speculating who it was. But that was probably the funniest thing, and watching the speaker, because we could see the speaker's face, try to act like she didn't hear it, which was pretty fun.
So I don't have an audio version of that, but I do have a visual version of that, because when people, they mute their microphones to scream at their children, thinking that they've also muted their video. You can see that.
You can see the rage in their face.
Right. But
yeah,
you
exactly.
get to add your own words to it.
That's right. All right. Well, enough of that, man. I could shoot the shit with you all day, that's for sure, but we probably better get to it. You've given us a little bit of background on Ncontracts kind of at a high level, but give us a quick thumbnail sketch of sort of your background and kind of how, career-wise, you don't have to hit everything, but kind of hit the high points for us from BU forward. So
Yeah, sure. So I've actually been telling this story a lot lately. So just real quick on the pandemic side of thing, we've expanded a lot during the pandemic. So we've done through both organic and acquisition. We've added about 40 people during the pandemic. So that's 40 people I've never actually physically met, which is nuts for me in an organization that really does pride itself on relationships being the thing that moves the organization forward. So I've embarked on a mission to get to meet every single one of these people, and I've been telling my origin story to now about 30 of the 40 people. So it's very repetitive. So maybe I can pull a little bit from that one.
go for it.
So yeah, man. So BU forward. So first, I think you got to start at BU. So I started at BU way back in the day studying biomedical
That's Boston
engineering.
University for those of you who don't know.
Yeah, not Baylor, although that's a fantastic university as well. But yeah, so Boston University, started back there in the early 90s studying biomedical engineering, and ended up switching to computer science because I took
Did
a
you think you
full-time
wanted to be a
job.
doctor? Was that what you were thinking?
I was pre-med, actually, but I don't think I wanted to be a doctor. I think I wanted to go and do things like build prosthetic limbs and
Okay.
other things that would kind of interface between computers and human beings.
Gotcha.
But ended up switching to computer science. It was a natural thing for me at that time, and really right at the beginnings of the dot-com boom. So this was 1995 when all that happened, and started doing a lot of different development things. And I think the most interesting thing that I got to do was when I was living in San Diego, I worked for a company called Cerebra. And Cerebra built a semantic inferencing engine. And so when you guys think about AI and you think about trying to understand things, what Cerebra was building was the capability of truly understanding language and things that are on the web, so that not only could you classify things, but you could really interpret what those things are, which is important when you're trying to do things in the artificial intelligence world. So that was a great job for me, and just kind of progressed from there in different software development things, and ultimately into management, into product development. When we ended up in Nashville, I was working for a company called Jack Henry & Associates. So Jack Henry builds banking core systems and a bunch of other things. It's one of those serendipitous, like I love the company. I think Jack Henry is a fantastic company, but I'd always had this entrepreneurial bent to me. And I was sitting there saying to myself, well, you've got a 4-year-old child, and you're going to have to start saving for college for that kid. We were older when we had our first kid, so probably weren't going to have too many more. In fact, we only have the one. But I started thinking about, okay, you got to start saving for college and all that. So you're either going to leave Jack Henry now, or you're going to die at Jack Henry. That was kind of the thought process. So I left and went to go work for this tiny little 5-person startup company that did Check 21 clearing for mobile banking, essentially. That's actually where Bryan and you and I met, right?
That's
when
right.
I was at Clear Payments. And that company got bought pretty quickly thereafter by a company called Ingo. And Ingo built check deposit and check guarantee services for traditional check cashers, and then we started building a product that allowed you to do that in the mobile space. So actually, the ability to, which we've all done remote deposit, but to do a remote deposit capture on a mobile device, guarantee the check is good, and then turn that check into instantaneous funds available in somebody's prepaid card or their bank account. Super interesting work. Lots of risk involved in that particular thing. Certainly germane to fraud. And then after that, I really enjoyed that work, but I felt like there was more that I could do. It was a remote company, so it was a little bit difficult, and wanted to kind of join an executive team in Nashville. And that's how I ended up at Ncontracts, joining Michael Berman's team there, which has been a fantastic ride. We've gone from, when I started, about 4 people in the product and technology organization with some outsourcing, and we will eclipse 80 people by the end of this year in the organization, just in the product and technology
total head count
organization.
for the company, where you about 300 now?
Yeah, I think we're right at that mark, somewhere around 280. I think we're going to be a little bit over 300 by the end of this year. So it's a great story. Company's grown a lot.
And what's the year-over-year growth rates been? I know I'm not going to ask about revenue, but in terms of growth rates, what's that been looking like for you guys?
I think we were in the 60 to 70% last year, somewhere in the same range the year before. So as a financial services company, growing very rapidly. We've been on the Inc. 5000 now for the last 3 years from a growth perspective, which is hard to do as you continue to grow. So yeah, it's a great story from that perspective.
So real quick, give us a summary. I know it's, I could say compliance as a service or risk management as a service or some buzzword like that, but give us a quick summary of what Ncontracts does for financial institutions, because it's mostly financial institutions at this point, as I understand it.
It is. So we are a general risk and compliance platform. So financial services have to manage all of the risks and compliance, both from a regulatory perspective as well as hey, this is the right thing to do from a fiduciary perspective. And so we provide software and services in that particular space. We started out, our bread and butter was really in vendor management. So when you think about high-profile risks that can occur in an organization, think about you've got a particular vendor like SolarWinds, and they get breached. What's the impact to your organization? What kind of diligence did you need to do against those folks in order to ensure that those downstream effects don't impact you? So we have a lot of software and services built around that, and then we just have basic risk management stuff that can be layered on top of it. So your business continuity planning, your operational risk management, your cybersecurity understanding of risks. And then we, a couple years ago, started getting into lending compliance as well. So mortgage lenders and non-depository institutions have to do a lot of different things to make sure that they comply with fair lending and Community Reinvestment Act and the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act. So we provide software and services around that as well.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I think that's probably a good lead in. The subject matter for this podcast, right, was risk management in a risky world, or at least that's the title I ginned up. I've spent a lot of time on that one. But it was mostly around, I wanted to think about this idea of risk. And, the idea of business risk is broad, right? It covers all kinds of things. But wanted to talk maybe specifically, or at least get to the specifics around sort of technology risk and where it sort of fits into that picture.
Sure.
And so, when you think about Ncontracts, if you had to give a, sort of an elevator pitch, or, in terms around what problem are you solving, or what's the job to be done that Ncontracts does for its clients, how would you describe that?
Well, the job to be done is help me understand the risks that I have as an organization, whether it's a technology risk, whether it's a financial risk, whether it's there's a lot of different types of risks that actually go into financial services, but maybe we can just focus on those two. So help me understand the risks that I've got that are occurring within my organization. And then let me figure out what I need to actually do to control those risks. So you're never going to get rid of all the risks that occur, right? So
Sure.
The first step is let me assess what risks actually exist. So that requires you to do some deep thinking around your organization and where you're spending your time and the types of things that are touching your organization. And then you also need to understand what's my appetite for those risks, all right? So some places are more risk averse than others. And then you need to understand, okay, given my risk appetite and the risks that actually exist, what controls do I need to put into place in order to mitigate that risk? Because no matter what, you're going to have some acceptable amount of risk, and you need to be able to manage to that. So what Ncontracts is really doing is providing the framework for you to go and understand the risks that are existing in your organization, helping you identify what your appetite is for those particular risks, helping you identify controls that you might want to put in place in order to mitigate those risks, and then ultimately guiding you through the process of assessing those risks on a continuous basis so that you can ensure that any threats that might exist as a result of those risks are actually being mitigated through the controls that you have in place. So it's one thing to have controls. You need to know if those controls are actually active, and the second one is, are they effective? And so we're helping our customers do that type of work. And in financial services in particular, there are thousands, if not tens of thousands, of banks, credit unions, mortgage companies, and now as fintechs start to enter into this regulated space, there are not tens of thousands of compliance officers out there that are truly trained in order to do these things. And there's the vast difference between a $200 million bank or credit union and a $200 billion bank or credit union as far as their expertise as well as the complexity of their environments. So Ncontracts also brings with it a lot of content that doesn't really exist anywhere else in the world to help our customers understand the types of things that they should be considering as they look at their regulated risks and other risks in the organization.
So you see yourself really as a risk and compliance partner with those institutions and providing them a platform for assessing and managing that, right? So I'm envisioning a bunch of checklists and a bunch of smart ways to ask good questions, but then also prompts and content to help you maybe think about some of those areas as well. So talk to me a little bit specifically, what are the kinds of technology risks that you see sort of dealing with inside your platform?
Yeah, so, well, maybe you can expand on that question a little bit. So when you talk about dealing with inside our platform, you mean the types of risks that we're helping our customers mitigate?
Exactly, yeah. So like risk can be, you can have financial risk, right? Your balance sheet, you can have too many loans and too many deposits, right? That's or asset liability balance or something like that. You can have what I'd call maybe straight regulatory risk in the sense of there are filings and information you have to provide to the government or to the regulatory agency. And if you don't do that, that's a problem, right? Neither of those is really a technology risk. I mean, they could be aided and abetted, but they're not. But a technology risk could be as simple as, protecting the information you have from people getting it from the outside, right? Or, systemic risk around your mobile banking or interfaces you have that are exposed to the internet. Inside, I guess, technology abated inside issues around tracking of funds as they relate to your core systems or things like that. I'm just wondering where do those pieces fit in sort of the broader picture?
Yeah, it totally helps. So first of all, I mean, I think we all as technology people understand it's if, not when, right? So it's actually it's not if, not when, sorry. It's when, not if, right? So
Correct.
I think as technology people, we all understand that it's when, not if. So you are going to get breached at some point. It's a matter of fact. My son and I were talking the other day. He was talking about, hey, we should put smart locks on the house because it'd be great to be able to get in and out easily. And then he starts talking about, but they could get hacked and somebody could break in to the house. So maybe that's not a great idea, Dad. And I looked at him. I said, son, what we really should do is just take all the locks off the house. And he's like, why? I'm like, well, because the doors are made of glass. So what good does it do to have?
If they really want to get in, they're going to get in, right?
That's exactly right. I'm like, and so what we're really trying to do is we're trying to put layered defenses around our house, son, to help us keep the bad guys out. Not necessarily the locks, but sometimes the cameras are actually going to be the things that keep people out. That's why there's a big blinking light on the camera, because I want it to be visual for people.
I want to make sure
they
know
they're being recorded.
Right.
So I think you've got to take that context into account when you're thinking about financial service or really any company that's got technology. You're going to get breached, and so you're trying to figure out, well, how do I mitigate against the risks of the data exfiltration once I do get breached, right? So what I think are some of the biggest challenges that organizations have is understanding the data governance that they've got and where that data is actually going. So one of the things that we concentrate on is third and fourth party vendor management. So a financial services company, a bank in particular, is not building all its own technology, right? They are clearly outsourcing things to other companies. I know this because I was a provider of software to other companies to do that for banks.
That's what Jack Henry does.
That's right, and has been doing for a long time and spends a lot of time on ensuring that those systems are as secure as reasonably possible. So we know people are going to get into your systems, and we know your data is potentially going to get exfiltrated. So one of the things you really need to understand is what data exists where. So if I've got third and fourth party vendor relationships and I've got concentration in, say, Azure or an AWS because of those third and fourth party vendor relationships, if Azure gets hacked, how do I know whether or not what data is sitting there and in what regions and in what databases? And so gathering and collecting that type of information so that you can very rapidly respond to it, I think is one of the most critical things that people can do from a threat in the technology space perspective. Because once you do understand that you've been breached, time is of the essence. Because if I can tell all my end customers, hey, we got hacked 7 seconds ago and your social security number was just released with your credit card number, maybe you could actually go cancel your credit card before somebody actually starts pulling money out of it. Or even worse, maybe you linked up your debit card instead of your credit card, and now you don't have the same protections that you might have on a credit card. So having that kind of information, I think, is important. And I'm not one to give kudos to T-Mobile, but I will tell you, I was impressed recently when T-Mobile got breached that they did tell me, number one, that they got breached just that week, and number two, they were very fast in letting me know that my data was not part of it. Because that's, as a consumer, that's the first thing I'm starting to worry about. So understanding where your data lives, I think, is a key component to technology risks and to the types of things that we're trying to do within our organization.
So, it kind of leads to a little bit of a philosophical question in my mind, but one that I want to put out there for you. And that's, on balance, do you feel like technology has made risk management easier or harder?
I think technology has made risk management easier from the perspective of understanding the risks that you know about. I think technology has made risk management much harder because the number of threats is way, way higher. So, 100 years ago, your money was in a vault, and nobody was getting into that vault unless they got past the 7 guards, and so that was a difficult thing to do. Although there are a lot more bank robberies than people hear about. And I know you know a little bit about that space for sure.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
right? But the risks were knowable. I mean, you could know that you had 2 feet of concrete on each side of your vault, and that it would require 8 sticks of dynamite to get in. The risks right now are just so unknowable as a result of technology, and the tools necessary to hack into these systems are freely available to anybody. And so if somebody gets a grudge with you or just decides to start paying attention to you, you've got a lot more risk. So I guess on balance, I think it's made it a lot harder.
I got it. And then, so, obviously you guys are a software play around this particular issue. What else are you seeing financial institutions do in terms of trying to leverage software to manage technology risk in particular?
So I think a big piece of it is they're trying to leverage software and services to eliminate the need to have specialists inside their own organization do it. Bankers are good at banking, right? They're not necessarily good at building layered defense systems from a technology perspective. That's a necessary evil for the model that they really have, which is figuring out how to manage a really effective balance sheet and portfolio and lend money out to people. And so I think they're leveraging as much technology as they can, both from a software and a service perspective, to minimize the number of people that they have to have involved in-house to do it. The other thing they're doing is leveraging technology to understand their compliance burdens, because the compliance regulations continue to change. And if you try to keep up with that on your own, it's very difficult. So having software in place that can help you understand what risks you have internally as they relate to the compliance obligations you have, I think is a big one for these banks. Then I guess the last one is just automation.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's just automated stuff around fraud. So trying to understand by looking at big data what potential fraud vectors might be occurring within your organization to do things like anomaly detection and exception detection, and try to let the machine figure some of that stuff out for you, which has a lot of its own challenges around governance and understandability, but it's still something that they're actively looking into.
And I assume that's part and parcel with the first one around really an outsourcing play, right? Because that's a level of expertise would be difficult for a $500 million, $1 billion community bank to have in-house.
For sure. And actually, I think it's a challenge that they've got from a competitive differentiation perspective, because so the FFIEC put out a commentary letter the other day. We actually participated in it, where they were asking questions about the use of AI as it relates to regulated industries like banking and what some of the implications are. And one of the major implications that we pointed out, among others, is that large companies like Apple or Google or somebody else who really understands this stuff could completely come in and disintermediate banks if they're given the regulatory charter to do so, and in a way that the government wouldn't be able to understand. And I think that's a really interesting risk. So how does a $500 million, which a $500 million financial institution is basically 100 people, right? Yep. So how does that institution compete with an Apple or a Google as it relates to trying to offer credit to people in their own local geography, when Apple or Google knows 1,000 or 100,000 times more about those consumers than the bank does?
Well, and they're doing it algorithmically, which means they don't necessarily know why the decisions are being made, right? The nature of a black box mean what goes on in the black box is a little bit unknown, right? Which flies directly in the face of the idea of fair lending or other things, right? So there's some real problems with the expansion of financial services from a regulatory perspective. Now, there are lots of people who think those are rules we ought to that have seen their better day. They're not They're not the regulators today. So those are the rules of the game as it stands. So
well, and it's interesting that the folks that think those rules have seen, they were a relic of a different type of time. I think they don't really understand the complexities of the human actors involved in these challenges. I mean, those rules exist in order to protect people. As much as I'm actually not a huge fan of, I'm a relatively conservative libertarian kind of guy, so not necessarily a huge fan of regulations coming in place, but the protections afforded by those things I think are really important. And
yeah, they're definitely trying to solve a real problem. You can argue about whether that's the right way or the extent to which that should be applied, but if you deny there's a problem, I think you're kidding yourself, right? I think that's probably a safe way of saying that.
And if you're modeling if you're using artificial intelligence to model what's happened already within your lending profile, and your lending profile was, let's say, I don't know, racist already, then now you've just automated racism, and it will be self-feeding and get worse. I think it was Microsoft who put out some sort of a help chat system a couple of years ago, It was geared towards talking to teenagers, and they just wanted to see how the AI would respond to teenagers. And of course, what do teenagers do? They start talking about horrible topics, and immediately the AI was probably the worst actor on the planet.
Picking up on it, yeah, they're becoming one of the crowd. So
That's right.
They're so good that it was bad. And
That's right. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
I'll sort of fold back into that in a second because I do want to talk a little bit about blockchain as it relates to some of the things that are going on around innovation, specifically to risk management. But before we do that, I can't avoid talking about the topic. In your mind, and kind of what in terms of what you guys see, how big is the people problem when it comes to risk management, and how does the technology side of that play in? Is it even worse when it comes to technology risk management?
Yeah. So I think the people problem is twofold. Obviously, there are people who are nefarious out there that are going to do bad things, right? So let's put that people problem aside.
Yeah, put the black hats to the side. Let's talk about white hats, either internal or external, right? Current customers or current employees of a company.
I think the biggest risk problem you have with the people in an organization is actually complacency. So I don't think it's that people don't want to do the right thing. I think number one, they don't necessarily know what the right thing is, but two, they got their day jobs. So again, you're in a bank or you're a financial services organization. Your job is, while there are some people who specialize in risk and compliance, for the vast majority of the first line of defense, those people who are doing the work, that's not their job.
Do transactions, make loans,
make loans, etc.
Sell products, do marketing, whatever it might be, right?
That's right. And the pressure on them is not around the compliance side. That's a ding. It's how many sales did you make today? How many transactions did you close today? That's the pressure. So I think that they get complacent around that. And so what I believe the technology needs to do is to be front and center to help them in line do the things that they need to do so that they can become more compliant. So as an example, we recently bought a company that builds an intranet, which may sound like it doesn't make that much sense for us to, as a risk and compliance company, to buy an intranet. But I felt like it made a ton of sense from the perspective of connecting that first line of defense to your compliance and regulatory activities. So now we can use that intranet to educate people, to let them submit complaints, to help them with their day-to-day work, help them find policies, see where they're sticking on those policies, etc., so that we can then push that back up to the second line of defense, who can then help those people on the first line do more work. So using technology to try to gather information and disseminate information in a way that is regulatory and compliance focused. So yeah, that to me, Brian, honestly, it's the complacency side of thing more than anything. I think the technology needs to be enablers around that, and it needs to happen in the background in a way that's sort of ubiquitous and doesn't get in your face.
And one of the things we talk about on Cut the Shit a lot is the idea, this idea of technology is magic, and that while technology is magical or can be magical in a lot of ways when it's applied. I mean, there's pretty incredible stuff that
Sure.
we can do with technology. And again, I'm speaking, at a high level, right? Whether that's software or enabled, Internet of Things or the Internet or whatever. This sort of idea of technology as magic really is a cultural thing now. It's embedded in our culture, right? In terms of the developed world. I feel like that works against us in this case because I think most people, and I think the industry is guilty of overselling the technology as magic, particularly when it comes to this kind of thing that, don't worry about it. We've got all this cool stuff on your computer. It'll protect you. Don't sweat it. All you got to do is buy X, right? And no worries, right? The bad guys can't get to you. And that may not be, I'm just interested to know how you guys, do you feel a little bit like Cassandra in terms of partnering with your compliance officers and saying, hey guys, these things are real? Is it complacency from that perspective or just, I'm so damn busy, I really don't have time to try to figure this other stuff out? Or is it a little bit of both?
I think it's a little bit of both. So, I guess it was Dick Cheney back in the day who said there's the known knowns, the unknown
right before
knowns.
he said, hey, get out of the way before
Right.
I shoot?
Exactly.
Okay.
And then the unknown unknowns, right? And so I think, I had this conversation with our CEO the other day. I said, we're really good at helping people understand the known knowns. But what are we doing to help them understand the unknown unknowns, right? The things that they don't know. Because to me, those are the ones that are going to bite them in the ass. And his response was, yeah, there's a ton of stuff that we can do around that, but our customers aren't even focused on that. All they care about is meeting the regulatory obligations because they think that's good enough. And I don't, as a consumer, think that meeting the regulatory obligations are good enough because I don't necessarily trust the government to have established all of those things. And as we talked about before, they can't possibly know the challenges that are going to be arising from a big tech perspective and who can do what as a result.
Yeah, I mean, the regulations, one of the questions I had that I'm not even going to bother asking because it's so obvious, right, is do regulators really understand technology risk? And I think that's probably a rhetorical question, right? It's not fair to expect them to be able to understand emerging threats in the technology universe. And regulation is always going to lag innovation, right? It's the nature of that process. And I would imagine you see that firsthand.
I do, but I give props to the regulators for trying to understand emerging technology risks. I think they actually do a pretty good job of it. But you got to think about what's the auditor's role from a regulatory perspective. It's to make sure that you meet the requirements of the regulation. And who writes the laws? It's not the regulators that write the laws. It's the legislators that are writing the laws, and then you've got regulators that interpret those laws to create rules around them to go do things. So unless somebody comes in and says, we're going to change the way you think about technology and we're going to, by fiat, tell you how it must be, I don't see how you would ever have a regulator be able to tell you what you can do and can't do from a technology perspective, or give you cookie cutter things that you should be considering.
Yeah, I mean, you've got standards like safety and soundness or things like that, but that can be interpreted. I mean, to your point, right? I mean, what does safety and soundness really mean, right? That those are things about which reasonable people can disagree, and they do, right? And even in a regulatory regime, you can have differences across. The Fed in the Northeast may be different than the Fed in the Southwest, down at the individual regulator level. I've seen that. I saw that in my career on multiple occasions, right? So there's still humans playing in this game.
That's right.
And it makes it real interesting from that standpoint.
Absolutely. So they can't keep up, and it's not their fault. So that to me is the set of unknown unknowns, and it's whether or not financial institutions need to care about them. And I think at the end of the day, they do. And I think that if they're taking a true risk management approach, then what they're trying to do is mitigate all those threats. And it's not just the threat of fine, it's the existential threats that occur if you don't do these things.
Yeah, what about my investors? Forget about the regulators for a second, right? What about my customers, right?
Well, right, and I espouse this all the time to my people, because we run a software as a service organization, so I've got a hosting operation that exists around that, and I tell them all the time, I'm like, you guys need to understand, if we get breached, and I'm sure we will one day, if that data isn't properly handled and encrypted, et cetera, and somebody can actually do something with this, you might as well just not come to work the next day, because we service banks. And guess what? They're not going to keep us as a customer. So we spend
You're not going to get a lot of second chances with that.
No, we spend a lot of time and money on that to ensure that we're doing the best that's possible.
So before we transition, I do want to get to a little bit about blockchain. Not a lot, but a little bit. You mentioned AI, and when I think about your platform as much surface area as it has, and sort of the wide-ranging areas that you cover from a risk management standpoint, and you don't have to reveal secrets, but in terms of R&D or looking at leveraging AI, how are you guys thinking about that as it relates to what the platform might be able to do for a customer?
So there's an infinite number of possibilities around that. So I think without revealing too much of what we're trying to do, I would say we're trying to glean insights from the information that's coming into our systems and help you understand the interconnections of things that you might not have understood before. So I have this vision in my mind of, you remember Clippy from Microsoft Office days?
Yeah,
Clippy. Who doesn't remember Clippy? Well, if you're young, you may not
there's a lot of young
Clippy.
people who don't. Yeah, if you showed it to them, they would think that was stupid, and they might not be 100% wrong.
Well, what you got to understand is all the chat systems that pop up on every single website you use nowadays that ask you if you want help, that's Clippy.
Came from Clippy. Oh,
that's
I know.
Right.
Yeah, it was the character that was the problem, not the concept.
Well, I liked the wizard dog better than Clippy. But regardless, I have this vision of Clippy popping up in our software, no matter where you're at, and saying, hey, saw you were doing this activity. Have you considered this other thing that might be related to it? And I think the only way that's going to come is through some sort of AI that's building that out. And that's near and dear to my heart, just based on a lot of the background that I've got. So the more information that we can get into our systems and the more data that we can infer based on that, the better we can do. And one of the things that we're able to do, because we've got thousands of financial institutions that use our system, is we can anonymize that data. And then we can actually go make inferences across the whole ecosystem as opposed to just yours. So most of these smaller institutions don't have enough data to actually make machine learning viable for them. But when you aggregate it across the whole, you actually can do some interesting things with it. So we're experimenting with some things around that, with a lot of things around data ingestion. And then I know you're gonna jump into blockchain in a minute. I think one of the things that we keep thinking about, and again, blockchain's not AI, but people like to think of them in kind of the same. same technology vein. But one of the things we're thinking about is data governance as it relates to the ability to say that, I perform an audit, right? And when I perform an audit based on a set of data. Well, how do I know that data hasn't changed since you did the audit, right? And blockchain and technologies like that can help us do some of that.
All right, well, you're stealing my thunder, but this does feel like a good time to pivot into this new little segment we've got called Hot Topic, not to be confused with the super cool store that used to be in the mall back in the days. Probably most young people don't even know what that is.
Or Hot Pockets, which are delicious.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. We want to take a quick look at an emerging technology trend. It's relevant to the discussion we're having. So for today, let's talk about blockchain. You mentioned a little bit, or you kind of got into it on your side. Regardless of your stance, on crypto as an asset class or store of value or whatever, I think everyone agrees that this idea of distributed ledgers and smart contracts are really going to have a big impact on businesses large and small. You started talking about that a little bit on your side, but maybe expound, even go beyond your own realm and think and describe to me a little bit maybe how you see that playing out in financial services writ large.
I wish I knew the answer to that question. I also wish I had bought Dogecoin when it was, at a 1,000th of a penny. I would have sold it all by now, but still, wish I'd bought it. Brian, I don't know that I know the answer to that question. So smart contracts is a great example of a solution waiting for a problem to happen. So yeah, great. We're able to track that these diamonds that came from the Congo are the real diamonds that they said they were, but it doesn't stop the fact that 500 people died in the mining of those diamonds, and right? I mean, you're still going to have conflict diamonds as a result of it. Contracts and contract disputes have existed forever. This concept of automating around that, I haven't found the actual real use case that's going to drive that yet. So I'm interested to see when that happens. I mean, have you seen things where you're like, oh yeah, that's the killer use case?
No, my bugaboo, or the thing that bothers me the most is buying title insurance when I've bought a house. It seems like the biggest waste of money ever.
It does.
I mean, are you telling me that the houses that I've bought that have been sold 40 times or 30 times don't have clean titles, and yet I have to buy insurance on that thing? And I keep thinking that seems to be like a place where we could do it. We could apply a smart ledger and deal with that. But I guess that means retroactively gathering all that data and getting it into the ledger, which I'm sure is the problem. So,
well, you could do it going forward, though. I mean, I'm refinancing my house as we speak, and I did it 2.5 years ago as well. So I know my title was clean then, and I owned the house then. And
you still had to buy insurance, though, because the bank required you to.
That's right. So honestly, that's probably less of a smart contract thing and more of a racket that needs to get eliminated from a regulatory perspective than anything.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't counting on the title insurance companies to do it. I was counting on somebody to come in from the outside and disintermediate those guys.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I actually am surprised that some fintech hasn't done it yet.
Probably $10 a month, for the ability to have access to that ledger. And it transfers from property owner to property owner. It would be an annuity and way cheaper than title insurance. Anyway, that's that.
What? Sign me up all day, every day, or just make it part of my checking account, so that when I get my checking account from the fintech in the future, that service is provided as part of it.
There you go.
Yeah. So I think smart contract is an interesting one. I think the concept of data protection and just ensuring that things haven't changed in the process is an interesting one. But honestly, I don't. Distributed ledger versus blockchain is an interesting one there, because really, do I need anything more than just the hash at that point?
Yeah, I guess it does get interesting, right? And how far do you go with it, and what are its applications, right? It's a super interesting technology that I think has a ton of applications. That, to your point, we're 10 years into this thing, right? We're just getting started, so I'm counting on that being something that has a long life. I don't know about Dogecoin, but I do know about blockchain, right? In terms, I'm willing to say for sure.
I think it'll have a long life as well. I think this is a lot of screwdrivers being thrown at nails kind of conversation as well, though. I do think people are trying to, instead of, there's a great technology that's super, super brilliant, the way that it was come up with. Now let's go find problems to solve with it. I think is the harder part, as opposed to here's a problem that I need to go solve kind of deal.
Yeah, you're right. Let's transition to a couple of wrap-up questions on sort of the relationship between the CTO role and the CIO. I just want to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll close with a little lightning round question session that'll be for fun, and then we'll let you get back to work.
Sounds good.
All right. So, from a CTO perspective, I mean, where do you see the overlap between kind of your job and sort of the CIO or the IT department's job? Where do those overlap from your perspective?
I actually think it's pretty clear. So I think the CIO is the inwardly facing component of an organization as it relates to technology, and the CTO is the externally facing focus of it. So, as I am the chief technology officer of our organization. The CIO, if we had one, would end up reporting to me simply because of just the way we do our governance. But my chief focus is focus on our customers and the needs of the customers and how we can most effectively service those customers. And I think the CIO is focused on the business and asking the questions, what does the business need in order for it to do what it's doing? So it's this sort of internal versus external focus, and I think they're fundamentally different. The other way that I would look at it is that CTOs are outcome-oriented. So I've got an outcome that I'm trying to achieve, and I think CIOs are output-oriented, which is I've got a project that I need to execute against, and how can I best effectively execute against that project? So I don't know if that answers the question, but I just think they have different focuses. We all may use computers, we all may need to understand technology, but one is creating brand new things that have never existed potentially for an organization. I think the other one is taking things that have been created and integrating them most effectively within the organization.
So I'll push back a little bit on that just from my perspective. Strategically speaking, the IT side of the house is obviously taking care of internal stuff, but also, can really be seen as enabler of that external capability. And the ownership of that enabling stuff, infrastructure, cloud services, whatever it might be, I think I know enough about your shop to know that falls in your purview, but that's not the case at a lot of places. So in many ways, the CTO could be a customer of the CIO in terms of being able to deliver on those outcome-oriented results you were talking about. So, from that as a perspective, how important is that relationship between those groups or those individuals?
Oh, I think it's critical, and I don't know that they have to be, adversarial is probably not the right word. Sometimes I think that does happen though when you've got the CIO and the CTO both reporting to the CEO, for example. Typically not the model. You might have a CIO that reports into the CFO, and then the CTO reporting into either product or into the CEO directly. I think they've got to work hand in hand with each other, but I do think their focuses are different. So one is, like you said, the CIO I do think plays a role of a strategic enabler for the entire organization. So whether that's how do we focus on driving margins up organizationally by applying technology to the organization to enable people to do things differently? I think that is the type of question the CIO would answer, whereas I think the CTO should be answering questions of how do we drive new sales and new revenues up by creating new products that can be sold and leveraged to our customers. So not every organization needs a CTO.
Right. I mean, your software organization, we're talking about specific,
Sure.
some specific types of organizations for sure.
Yeah, so not everyone needs a CTO, but I would say most organizations that have some technology either need a CIO or some sort of outsourced CIO model where they can get a fractional CIO from another company or something along those lines. And I think that's an emerging thing that needs to be heavily looked at. Whether it's your CSP that's doing those types of things for you or somebody else. I think the CIO probably lends itself more to that type of role than the CTO would.
And that leads into the question, I mean, from your perspective, where does IT, when done right, really help you with your development efforts?
When does IT, when really done right, help with my development efforts? When I don't know they exist, right? When it's like turning on the faucet and water just comes out. I think that's the challenge is that, and this is where IT organizations get a bad rap sometimes, is that they're too much in the process. There are too many layers that they put in place in order to hamper us from doing things, which I don't have that problem because we've largely solved most of those things. Our IT organization is heavily embedded with our product organization to ensure that we know what's coming earlier on in the process. But that would be, to me, is if you can make it like a utility, then IT is extraordinarily enabling.
So they're like the offensive linemen of the business world, right? You never notice them unless they get a penalty.
That's right. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. That you either, unless they get a penalty or unless they consistently collapse in the pocket.
Exactly. Or they have like really interesting tattoos, or the helmet flies off, or something like that.
It's usually the hair.
Or they're like that guy who plays for the Chiefs, who's from Montreal, and he's a doctor. He goes and like works in the ER in the off season. His name is Laurent Duvernay Tardif. Look him up. He's like maybe the most interesting, with apologies to the Dos Equis guy, he's the most interesting man in the world. So
That's a great story. There are some super, super smart football players out there, too. I've been enjoying watching Gronk on his TV ads. I would not say he falls into
he's trying. I think he wants to be, he's like Peyton Manning, but, like a little bit different character. I think the two of them need to be in a commercial together.
It'll happen.
It's coming. I feel it. Yeah. So, I know you guys have pretty much cloud focused in terms of your development operation. So, having made that move or really having started there as a native, I'm not sure which for Ncontracts, it doesn't really matter. You're there now.
Sure.
Has that really freed up a lot of time for you that used to be spent on infrastructure and hardware and software and stuff? Or are you now spending that same time? Is that time just getting sucked up with DevOps and, variable resource usage and that kind of thing? How's that worked out for you guys in terms of your profile?
I would say that it has freed up time and it has freed up things for us to focus on. So it's hard to explain at Ncontracts. So when I first started at Ncontracts, we did have a data center and we managed our own environment. And I moved it almost immediately to the cloud because I just didn't see the value in it for us to do that. And I also wanted my customers to realize that they're outsourcing their critical risk infrastructure to us. It's okay for us to outsource our critical infrastructure to well-managed organizations like Amazon and Microsoft. So,
do you still get pushback on that? Is that
not much anymore?
Is that ever an issue?
Not really. It was an issue in 2017 and 2018, but not much. And actually, one of the acquisitions we did I guess it was literally December 31st of 2020. So I consider it a 2021 acquisition. Was a company that did not have any outsourced stuff. Everything was in-house and all installs on customer sites. And so we are trying to figure out how to migrate that to the internet,
right.
which will be a multi-year effort. But one of the efforts we undertook earlier this year was to survey our customers, thinking maybe 30 or 40% of them would be ready to move. 90% of them asked us to have a web-based product. They don't want it in-house anymore. And I think a massive reason for that is the challenges of COVID. So these guys have software that's installed on a PC. How do you get to it when you're working remotely, right? So now their IT organizations understand they've got hundreds of holes poked through their infrastructure in order to be able to get to that. They really don't want that anymore. So they all want to go to the cloud. It just makes sense.
Gotcha. So last question before we get to the wrap up, the fun stuff. So, and this is kind of a generic question, but, just sort of expound a little bit from your perspective. You talked some about it already, but, as a kind of a wrap up, in your mind, what is the sort of the ideal technology manager or CIO, even a line technology person, need to understand, or what would you want them to understand about the development function to help you guys do a better job and to help them do a better job supporting you?
Man, that's a great question. I think they need to understand that we don't know what we want to do until we do it. So I know that's just the same question of, well, why can't you just tell me when it's going to be done, right? That's a classic software development question. And the reason is, it's like this. Well, here's what I want you to do. I want you to build a house, of course, without a blueprint. But while you're building that house, go ahead and create the blueprint. Tell me how much it's going to cost. And then when you're halfway through it, I want you to change the foundation of that house from being a slab to being a basement. And then in the middle of that, move it to the ocean and then have it float, right? I mean, there's just, it gets ludicrous as you go along. But and by the way, we're going to invent a brand new technology in the middle of it that I'm going to want you to apply. So I know you used wood for all of the frame and everything else that you did, but this new aluminum-based stuff is much lighter, so please use it instead. So you got to rip everything out. That's what happens to us from software development projects perspective, and it's even worse because people, they come to you with an idea. So I got to take the idea from Brian's head and translate it into software.
And Bryan probably does. He really doesn't know what he wants, to be honest.
That's right. And you don't know what you want until I tell you what's possible. So we're in this middle of this constant evolution of the thing until we build it. So now my IT organization wants me to give them 2 months worth of lead time to let them know when I need a new IP address shit up. And that's fascinating because our agile cycles have us delivering software every 6 weeks into production. And honestly, we deliver multiple times per day. So,
right.
and one of the features we delivered today, we conceived of 3 days ago and built it, tested it, and are ready to deploy it. And it needs a new IP address. So now you're telling me that you want me to wait 2 months before you're going to be ready to give me that IP address in production. And here's the kicker. The software that I have that I need to deploy, it's value. And it's value sitting on a shelf. It's inventory. It's like having cars sitting on a lot that people can look at, but they can't drive. Doesn't really do me much good as an organization. So I think that's the thing I need the infrastructure folks to really understand is as much as I want to tell you everything I'm going to be doing this year, it's impossible. And I know that's how you guys work, but that's just not the way that the rest of the world works, and we just can't do it. So that I think would be it, is provide flexible services that make it easier for us to do the things we need to do. And to that point, my infrastructure team has started to get that message. So I'll use the IP address one as for DNS entry one as an example. We now have scripts to generate DNS entries, and we have designated people in our organization, in the product organization, that can run them, so that it doesn't always have to be the IT organization doing it.
Right, they let you guys do it, right? They enabled a way for you to do it. Yeah.
Exactly. So they see the problems and they self-service us around them, and I think that's a real important thing to do from a partnering perspective.
Got it. I think that's a good one. It's a good place to stop with the sort of the formal stuff. So we always like to wrap up with a little lightning round of questions. I started this last time and it seemed kind of fun, so we're going to stick with it. So
always, this is the second time. So always on the second time. Got it.
I got it. Hey, we got it. A trend is 2, right?
That's right. It's a line.
There you go. Two data points. So we're going to structure this one a little different. We're going to do this one like a little bit of game of would you rather. All right. I'll ask you, would you rather, and you tell me which option you'd go with, and maybe give me a little why.
Okay.
So, would you rather watch Mr. Robot or Ted Lasso?
I think Ted Lasso, because I haven't watched it yet, and I have watched Mr. Robot, so I will go with Ted Lasso.
Okay, so you cheated on the first one. Okay, so that was weaseled out of the first one already. Okay, we'll see where we go from here. Would you rather sell insurance for a living or sell cars for a living?
I would rather sell insurance for a living because it's a dividend that keeps on paying, and once you get them in there, they're never going to walk away.
Hotel California, I like it. All right, would you rather be Superman or Batman?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Superman or Batman? I mean, they both.
Well, they're different, right? Superman's a real superhero. Batman's just
he's just
clever.
Made up. Yeah, no, and maybe not even that clever. I'm going to go with Superman, and I think it's. Largely because, he has every possible superpower you could ever want. There's really nothing he can't do. He's
wouldn't that be boring? What are you going to do? What mountains to climb?
I don't know. You get to serve people.
Your choice.
Yeah, So you're asking the question of what's the real risk, right? Superman has no risk of failure. That's, I guess, is the challenge.
I guess there's kryptonite. There's kryptonite. There is one thing.
There is one thing. So all he has to do is stay with a yellow sun and get away from kryptonite, and he should be fine. There's got to be an anti-kryptonite weapon out there anyway. I don't know why he hasn't bothered to team up with Batman to invent it.
Exactly. Would you rather water ski or drive the boat and pull someone water skiing?
I would much rather drive the boat pulling somebody water skiing. I have face-planted hardcore water skiing, and I don't need to do that again at my age, Brian.
All right, last one. Would you rather get tackled by J.J. Watt or punched by Floyd Mayweather?
Oh, God. I think tackled by J.J. Watt. Honestly, am I wearing pads, or is this just like out of the blue? He just
it's like you'd have to be wearing pads. It's not rugby. It's not fair. So.
I'd rather be tackled by J.J. Watt. Plus, I think I could juke him.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, we'll wrap it up and let Bill off the hook. But Bill, I'll give you the last word.
If
there's one thing you'd like the audience to take away from today's conversation, what would it be? And it can't be that risk management is cooler than IT, because we both know that ain't true.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think the thing that I would want people to understand, especially those of you who are like budding, trying to get into IT or software development or whatever it is. First of all, there's two things. Number one, IT and software development are not the same thing. So
that is true.
If you are a business person and you keep referring to your software development organization and product team as your IT organization, you are insulting them.
Stop.
So stop doing that.
That's a little hurtful. I don't know about saying that you're insulting them, but you're just missing. You're swinging and missing.
Yeah, sure. It's like me telling the marketing department that they're the advertising department, right? So
True.
That's one. And the other one would be that there is more to writing code and writing software than actually just putting lines of code into a computer. It requires human skills. And so I really would encourage anybody who's considering this stuff. Brian, we talked a little bit about introversion earlier in the conversation. Go learn about how to talk to people, how to understand vulnerability, how to gain trust and build trust, etc. Because ultimately, those software professionals, those product professionals, those IT people who can do that are going to be they're going to be the best in the world. So I would definitely tell you to go get yourself a psychology degree and understand people a little better.
I got it. On that, we will end there. Bill, really appreciate the time. Thanks for doing this for us on behalf of everyone at Plow. We really appreciate it.
Hey, Brian, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, take care.
Take care.
Cut the Shit is brought to you by Plow Networks and is produced by Talia DiDomenico and Emily Starnes. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, we'd be most grateful if you would share it with others who you think might be interested in hearing a somewhat irreverent take on the arcane world of IT. If you aren't enjoying it, well, why are you listening? You can find links to this podcast on our website at plow.net, on our YouTube and Instagram feeds, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, LinkedIn, and probably a bunch of other places too. Or as my kids like to say, just Google that shit. You'll find it for sure. Take care and have a great day.